YW Checkmark disclaimer: the following story is a dramatized retelling inspired by true events. Names, locations, and some identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of individuals. This story explores mature themes, including infidelity, emotional manipulation, and abuse of power. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The story is intended for awareness and emotional impact, not for sensationalism or judgment. Please approach with empathy and an open mind. I remember the night we got the news. My husband, Aaron, walked into our kitchen with the kind of grin I hadn't seen in months. He had been promoted, not just a small raise or a change in title, but a major step forward. Executive level, full benefits, stock options. It was the kind of opportunity we had been praying for. I was genuinely proud of him. He had worked hard, late nights and early mornings, sacrificing time and sleep to prove himself. We toasted with cheap champagne and laughed like we hadn't in years. The promotion also came with an invitation, a formal dinner hosted by his boss, Mr. Charles Devon. I had heard the name plenty of times. Aaron spoke of him with admiration and just a hint of fear. He's a genius, he'd say. Cutthroat, but brilliant. If he likes you, your career takes off. That evening, I dressed in my best black dress, wanting to make a good impression. I had no idea how much I'd come to regret that night. The dinner was held at an upscale hotel ballroom downtown. Crystal chandeliers, violinists, servers in white gloves. It felt like a different world, one where people didn't just earn money, they wielded it. Mr. Devon was charismatic, smooth-talking, and strangely intense. He shook my hand and held it just a second too long. His eyes scanned me in a way that made my skin crawl, but I pushed the feeling aside. I told myself I was imagining it. Throughout the night, he paid me compliments. Harmless at first, my dress, my smile, the way I supported Aaron. But as the evening wore on and the wine kept flowing, the compliments turned more personal. "You're far too stunning to be stuck in a kitchen," he joked, glancing at Aaron. "He's a lucky man." Aaron laughed. I forced a smile. That was the first time I noticed something shift. A strange tension in Aaron's body whenever Charles spoke to me. But he didn't stop him. If anything, he seemed flattered by the attention his boss gave me. It felt like I was being shown off, not as a partner, but as a trophy. I left that dinner feeling unsettled, though I couldn't fully explain why. I chalked it up to nerves, the fancy environment, the social pressure of being among powerful people. But in hindsight, it was more than that. That night was the first red flag, a silent signal of something twisted hidden beneath all the glitter and praise. I didn't know it yet, but that promotion wasn't a gift. It was a door being opened. And behind that door was a world where success came with a price, not just for my husband, but for me. And the man who opened that door would soon suggest something that would shake me to my core. The days following that first dinner were a whirlwind of excitement for Aaron. He was busier than ever. Conference calls late at night, surprise meetings on weekends, and work trips that popped up without warning. I chalked it up to the demands of a new role, proud of him for climbing the ladder so quickly. But something about the way he carried himself started to change. He became more careful, almost guarded, as if he was constantly being watched. In a way, he was by Mr. Devon. The invitations started soon after. At first, they were casual. Wine tastings, company barbecues, cocktail parties at the Devon estate. We went together to most of them, and each time I felt increasingly like I was being placed on display. Charles always found a way to single me out, complimenting my earrings, brushing against my arm too closely as he passed, offering me rare wines, and laughing too long at my jokes. What unsettled me wasn't just his attention, but how comfortable he was giving it. It was as though he thought of me as part of the package that came with promoting Aaron. Aaron noticed, I'm sure of it. But instead of putting distance between us and his boss, he began encouraging the closeness. "He just likes you," he'd say. "That's a good thing. It means he trusts me." I didn't know how to respond. Something about that logic felt twisted. Still, I trusted Aaron, maybe blindly, but I believed he knew how to handle his boss, and that I was overreacting. Then came the more unusual invitations. A weekend retreat at Charles's lake house. A private dinner just the three of us. A theater show where Charles insisted I sit beside him instead of Aaron. At one event, he asked me to dance. I laughed, trying to brush it off, but when I looked to Aaron for help, he just raised his glass from across the room and nodded, as if giving permission. After that night, I confronted him. Why is he always near me? I asked, why doesn't that bother you? Aaron's response was calm, too calm. It's how the game is played. He's eccentric, but harmless. Just let it go. The more he likes us, the faster I move up. Us. The word felt false. I didn't feel like part of any us anymore. I felt like currency being traded. And yet, part of me still clung to the benefit of the doubt. I told myself I was being sensitive, maybe even paranoid. This was a different world, after all. A world of suits and wealth and silent deals. Maybe this was just how things worked at the top. But my instincts were screaming. I started watching Charles more carefully, how he looked at me, how he touched my arm a little too long when saying goodbye. Each invitation started to feel like a test, like I was being measured, groomed. And what I didn't realize then was that the worst invitation hadn't even arrived yet. I'll never forget the moment the illusion of just business began to crumble. It was a Saturday evening. Charles had invited us to another one of his lavish parties, this time at an art gallery downtown. The theme was black and gold, walls covered in abstract pieces that looked like chaos on canvas. The guests were dressed like they walked out of a fashion magazine, each conversation dripping with wealth, deals, and quiet superiority. Aaron was glowing, more confident than I'd ever seen him. He floated from group to group like he belonged there, as if this world had always been his. But I felt increasingly out of place. Every time I tried to join a conversation, I was either ignored or politely redirected. I stuck close to Aaron at first, but he kept drifting away, always being pulled by Charles or his associates. About halfway through the night, I went looking for him. That's when I heard it. I turned a corner into a hallway leading to the private office section of the gallery and paused when I heard Aaron's voice, low, tense, and unfamiliar. He was speaking with Charles behind a closed door. I couldn't hear every word, but the few I did catch froze me in place. You said this wouldn't involve her. Then Charles, it's just a conversation. You knew what this entailed when you agreed. Don't act surprised now. There was a silence. Then Aaron, almost whispering, she's not like that. Charles laughed, but it wasn't friendly. It was sharp, cold. Then maybe she needs convincing. I backed away slowly, my breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what I had just heard, but the meaning, whatever it was dark. That wasn't about a work assignment or a marketing deal. That was about me, about something they had clearly discussed, perhaps planned, without my knowledge. The rest of the night blurred together. I plastered on a smile, held Aaron's arm when people looked, but inside, I was unraveling. I didn't ask him about the conversation that night. I wasn't ready. I wanted to believe I misunderstood, that I was paranoid, that I had heard wrong. But the next few days only deepened the pit in my stomach. Aaron became more distant, more irritable. When I brought up the gallery night and asked if he was okay, he just said, "Work's intense right now. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." That sentence rang in my head for days. It was what men said to women when they didn't want them asking questions. And for the first time, I realized how much Aaron had stopped seeing me as a partner. I was no longer his equal. I was a variable to manage. That was when the fear truly began. Not just fear of Charles, but fear of what Aaron had become, what he might be willing to do, what he had already allowed. And deep down, I knew something awful was coming. It was a Thursday evening when the invitation came, one that would turn my world completely upside down. Aaron forwarded me an email from Charles's assistant. Private dinner, just the three of us. Formal attire, no plus ones. I stared at the message, confused by the wording. No plus ones? But wasn't I the plus one? Before I could ask, Aaron walked into the room, already adjusting his tie. He wants to talk about a project. Says he wants your input. Something to do with branding a family-oriented campaign. He avoided my eyes as he spoke, his voice rehearsed and hollow. I'm not a branding expert, I said slowly. He shrugged. He thinks you have good instincts. Just come. Be polite. The discomfort in my stomach grew heavier, but I said yes. I wanted to believe there was a valid reason, something innocent. I wanted to believe my husband was still my ally. The dinner was held at Charles's penthouse suite, a massive space high above the city, all glass walls and designer furniture. Everything smelled of money and power. A private chef greeted us at the door, and soft jazz played in the background. It felt more like a seduction than a business meeting. We sat at a long table set for three. Charles greeted me with an overly familiar kiss on the cheek. "Even more stunning than usual," he said, motioning to my seat. I forced a smile, glancing at Aaron, who said nothing. As the evening went on, it became clear there was no campaign, no project. The conversation drifted far from business. Charles asked deeply personal questions about my marriage, our intimacy, whether Aaron was still satisfying me. My cheeks burned, but Aaron just chuckled nervously, sipping his wine as if this was somehow normal. When the main course was cleared, Charles leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You know," he said, eyes fixed on me, "I've helped a lot of men in Aaron's position, and I've learned that loyalty is a two-way street." I blinked. "I'm not sure I follow." He smiled, a slow, calculated smile. "Let me be direct. You're beautiful, smart, composed. You have value. If you and I were to spend a night together, it would be mutually beneficial." I felt the room tilt beneath me. "You're joking," I said, voice shaking. "I don't joke about business," he replied smoothly. "You'd be surprised how common this is. Aaron understands what's at stake." I turned to Aaron. He didn't look shocked. He didn't even look angry. He looked resigned. "I told you she's not that kind of woman," he said quietly, not even meeting my eyes. It hit me like a punch to the gut. He knew. He had known all along. Maybe he hadn't agreed, but he hadn't stopped it either. I stood up, shaking. "This dinner is over." Charles only sipped his wine. "Think about it. Opportunities like this don't come often." I walked out. That night, I didn't just leave the penthouse. I left behind every illusion I had about my marriage, my husband, and the price people are willing to pay for power. I didn't speak to Aaron the entire ride home. I sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, watching the blur of city lights flash past through the window, my chest burning with betrayal. My heart had never felt so heavy, not even when I first suspected something was wrong. Because now I knew. I knew that Aaron had allowed his boss to proposition me. I knew that my husband, the man I had once trusted with my whole heart, had stayed silent while another man measured my worth in favors and opportunities. When we pulled into the driveway, I stepped out of the car without a word and went straight to our bedroom, locking the door behind me. Aaron knocked once, then again. Eventually, he said through the door, "Can we just talk?" I didn't answer. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, looking like a man who hadn't slept. He didn't try to explain right away. He didn't deny it either. "I didn't want this," he said finally. "I didn't agree to anything." "But you didn't stop it," I snapped. "You let him talk to me like I was a bargaining chip." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what it's like working under him. He owns people, Emily. Their careers, their futures. He dangles everything in front of you like bait. If I say no to him, I lose everything I've built. And what about what we've built?" I said, my voice cracking. "Do I mean that little to you?" His eyes dropped. "Of course not. But I thought maybe you'd consider it." That sentence. That awful, gut-wrenching sentence. "I thought maybe you'd consider it." It told me everything I needed to know. He had thought about it. He had waited. He had, in his own twisted way, hoped I might say yes. That I might sell myself for him. That wasn't love. That wasn't partnership. That was a deal with the devil. I packed a bag that same day and left the house. I moved in with my sister across town, told my job I needed a few days off, and cried in the quietest corners I could find when no one was looking. The betrayal wasn't just about what happened at that dinner. It was about what Aaron allowed to happen long before that night. He had watched me become prey in a game he refused to leave. And even now, even after the truth was exposed, he hadn't shown the strength to walk away from it. Over the next week, Charles reached out. He sent a flower arrangement to my temporary apartment with a card that read, "Still open to negotiation." No judgment either way. I threw in the trash. That was the moment I realized I wasn't the one who was weak. I wasn't the one who had crossed any line. I had been used, Yes, but I still have my dignity, and I was going to protect it like hell from now on. For 3 days, Aaron bombarded me with messages. Some were apologetic, some were angry. Others were confused, like he still didn't fully understand why I had walked out. I didn't make you do anything, one text read. Why are you acting like I sold you? That line hit me like a slap. He still didn't get it. He hadn't physically forced me, no, but he had emotionally abandoned me at the most humiliating moment of my life. And worse, he had quietly hoped I'd go along with it. I agreed to meet him one last time. I needed closure, not for him, but for myself. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind with soft lighting and hushed conversations. I arrived first. He came in wearing the same suit he wore to Charles's penthouse that night, and it made my stomach turn. He looked tired, but I had a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was the distance. Maybe it was the clarity. Why did you let him talk to me like that? I asked once we sat down. He sighed, staring in his coffee cup. Because I was scared. He controls everything, Emily. One wrong move, and it's over. My whole career. So you gave it me instead? I asked, voice low but firm. No, he said quickly. I thought maybe if you played along, just a little, he'd back off. I never wanted you to actually. You thought I'd flirt my way through your promotion? I interrupted. Is that what you've reduced me to? You just didn't see it. No, you whispered. You fought for him, not me. That was the last time I saw him. I filed for divorce a week later. There were no long court battles, no dramatic showdowns. He didn't even contest it. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to save. Word eventually got out that Charles Devon had faced similar accusations from 2 other women, wives of other employees. Quiet settlements followed, and his public image took a minor hit, but his empire stood. Men like him always find a way to survive. But I wasn't concerned with him anymore. Or Aaron. I was focused on myself, rebuilding, healing, unlearning the ways I had allowed myself to be devalued. It was a slow process, messy and painful. But it was mine. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to protect someone else's career or reputation. I was protecting me. Leaving Aaron wasn't the hard part. Living with the emptiness he left behind was. In the weeks after the divorce was filed, I found myself waking up in my sister's guest room with an overwhelming sense of disorientation. My body was there, but my mind kept slipping back into what if and why me spirals. I would catch myself wondering what Aaron was doing, whether he missed me, whether he regretted it. But each time those thoughts came, I reminded myself, this was the man who stood by silently while his boss offered to buy a night with his wife. That wasn't love. That wasn't partnership. That was betrayal wrapped in a necktie. I threw myself into therapy. I needed it like air. The sessions were brutal at first. There were tears I didn't know I was still carrying. My therapist asked me hard questions. Why did you ignore the red flags? Why did you keep justifying his behavior? When did you start shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's ambition? It hurt, but it helped. For the first time in my adult life, I started answering questions I had been too afraid to ask. I also reconnected with things I had forgotten I loved. I started journaling again, page after page of raw, angry, honest thoughts. I signed up for a self-defense class, not just to feel strong physically, but emotionally. I joined an online community for women who had gone through emotional betrayal and manipulation in their marriages. Reading their stories helped me feel less alone. It also made me realize what happened to me wasn't rare, just rarely spoken about. One morning, about 2 months later, I was sipping coffee on my sister's balcony when I got an email from Aaron. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. I hope you're okay. I know I can't undo what I did. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted the message without replying. Not out of hate, not out of revenge, but because I didn't need his words anymore. I didn't need validation from someone who had once looked at me like currency. I had already begun giving that validation to myself. I moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, but full of sunlight and quiet. I got a new job, lower pay, but healthier environment. I started speaking more openly about what happened, not naming names, but sharing the experience in spaces where other women could hear and say, me too. Rebuilding isn't glamorous. There's no big reveal, no dramatic turning point, where everything suddenly gets better. It's slow. It's steady. It's choosing every single day to be your own sanctuary. And I was doing that, one brave, uncertain step at a time. 6 months after walking away from the life I thought I had, I stood on the small stage of a community center, reading my story aloud for the first time. It was part of a women's empowerment forum. My therapist had encouraged me to speak, not for attention, but for release. My hands trembled as I read, voice cracking when I got to the part about the penthouse dinner. But I didn't stop. I kept reading, kept breathing, kept reclaiming. When I finished, there was silence. And then applause. Not loud or theatrical, but genuine. Women came up to me afterward with tears in their eyes, whispering things like, "I live something just like this," or "Thank you for saying it out loud." That moment lit something inside me. For so long, I'd felt like a victim, like someone had been used, discarded, and diminished. But now I realized I had survived something that should have broken me. And not only had I survived, I had chosen not to let it define me. I began to write more essays, blog posts, anonymous interviews for advocacy groups. Each story I told, whether it was mine or someone else's, became a brick in the foundation I was rebuilding. I started mentoring women going through similar betrayals, helping them navigate the complex mess of grief, self-worth, and quiet rage. As for Charles Devon, he remained untouched publicly, but whispers grew louder. Other women started speaking up. A few brave employees quit and shared their experiences on anonymous forums. Eventually, an internal investigation was launched. Whether anything came of it, I don't know. I had stopped watching him. He no longer lived rent-free in my head. And Aaron? He messaged once more on my birthday. "Just hope you're doing well." I didn't reply, because I was doing well. Not perfect, not painless, but honest. Free. Alive in a way I hadn't been in years. I redecorated my apartment with colors that made me feel safe. Deep green curtains, books stacked beside warm yellow lamps. Art that made no sense, but made me smile. I adopted a rescue dog. A scruffy mutt named Oliver who followed me everywhere and gave me more loyalty than my husband ever had. One night, as I stood on my balcony watching the city lights flicker below, I felt a peace I couldn't quite explain. Not because life was easy, but because I had taken my life back, piece by piece, choice by choice. And now, when I tell my story, I no longer tell it from a place of shame. I tell it with pride, because what my husband's boss suggested that night, what was meant to humiliate me, silence me, by me, ended up doing the opposite. It woke me up. It gave me a voice. And I've never been more certain that voice will never be silenced again.